This is someone who is, I'm just a fan of all of his work. The many books on how the rich are essentially soaking the system. And he is a Trumpologist, and he has written chapter and verse literally on how the Trumps have done the same. Uh, and he is co-founder of DCReports.org. And there was a piece at DC Reports that I particularly wanted to get to today. So we'll ask him about Bill Barr. We'll ask him about malfeasance of all stuff. When it comes to grift and corruption and those who are doing it, there's one guy who's on the trail of them all. He is David Cay Johnston, the Pulitzer Prize winner. Hi, David.
Hello there. Sorry about your dad. You're doing the right thing. Family first.
Oh, thank you, my friend. Thank you so much. Well, David, I want to ask you first about something that the listeners, several of them have written in and asked about, and that is these revelations around William Barr, the former Attorney General, and how, in addition to essentially being a hatchet man for Trump and running interference on a lot of things, and now he's on this rehabilitation tour. It's disgusting. I saw Bill Barr kissing his ass the other night, and it made my skin crawl. I couldn't believe it. It's remarkable. If you just show any inkling of being against Trump on anything, those who are the center left, as they call themselves, like Bill Barr, they end up hugging and kissing you, which is what was happening. But now it's revealed that he was actually trying to do Trump's bidding politically at the Justice Department. So people are asking, is there any way for that which he did at the Justice Department that runs afoul legally of anything? Is there any way for him to be brought to justice in any way?
Well, as a practical matter, I have zero expectation that will happen. Barr's conduct was absolutely reprehensible. His torpedoing with the false statements of the Mueller report and saying that it didn't find wrongdoing when there are at least 10 criminal acts in the report. His hiding from the public something Mueller finally revealed because of a smart question that was asked in one of the Senate hearings, that in fact Mueller was ordered not to investigate what we all thought he was investigating. And then this
you're talking about, when you say that, you're talking about Russian money, are you not?
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. He was the Mueller investigation was not go and find out what you can. What we saw, say, with Ken Starr, was highly restricted. And then we find out that John Dunham, the career prosecutor who had an excellent reputation, came up with nothing. He had 2 minor cases he brought. Juries took very little time to dismiss the cases as being nonsense, and judges had pared the charges down before that. And we find out that the Italians advised our government of what appeared to be improper financial transactions by Trump. And Dunham was assigned to investigate those, but you wouldn't know that unless you dug deeply into the documentation. They didn't put it out there in public. So, Bill Barr is ruined, in my view and many other people's view, his reputation, that he had. But the likelihood that he'll be indicted, not going to happen. It's just not. As a practical matter, it's not going to happen. And let's not lose sight of the fact that the vast majority of white-collar crime in America never results in any criminal action. Even the majority of blue-collar crimes, in murders, the LA Times did a series, around the end of the 90s, and showed that in Los Angeles County, the 10 million people in LA County, that's more than about 10 of the 12 of the states, at least, only about 1 in 4 murders resulted in someone being convicted and sent to prison. And when you consider how many murders are, husband killing wife, wife killing husband, business partner killing business partner, there's relatively easy to solve murders, not a random stranger on the street. That's a pretty shocking number. So we've all been accustomed by TV procedurals and novels and movies, to think, boy, the cops, they get everybody. Nonsense. Most people who commit crimes get away with them.
Wow. I mean, it is, I guess on some level you get to a certain age and you're aware of this, but to hear it stated so bluntly, it's pretty it's pretty brutal. And the thing about white collar crimes, and of course you're right. I mean, just even the way the arrests of white collar criminals go down is so much different than the way the arrests of others go down. But uh, in the case of Trump and his constellation of those who were in on many grifts, David, uh, these are so high profile. That's why I would think it would be harder to skate away. But in truth, the length of time it's taken to bring charges, and now I want to kind of get to uh, this case that might, the payoff of Stormy Daniels, the case that might make it to court first. The time it's taken to get that uh, is starting to make us all think, oh, I get it. He's right. The president and former presidents are bulletproof.
Well, I've long been surprised that there was no prosecution in the Stormy Daniels case. I could understand why the federal government might not do it, but this is a case in which the co-conspirator, Michael Cohen, owned up to everything, and we have the documents. And for those who may not recall, in Stormy Daniels' version of this in her book, she and Donald had what we keep referred to in the news media as an affair that by her count lasted 45 seconds. So Donald Trump seems to have paid at the rate, hourly rate, over $10 million an hour to have sex with the porn star.
Well, to be fair, he had somewhere to be. So
yeah, right. And he clearly there was an illegal transaction here. Michael Cohen went to prison over this, and in fact, he was sent back to prison in what the courts held was an improper use of executive power to hurt him. So if, in fact, Alvin Bragg decides this is the case he's going to bring, he certainly brought a case that he's almost certain to win. And as I think I mentioned before on your show, Mark, there's an old saying among prosecutors, you don't bring the case you should, you bring the case you know you will win. And if you can't win this case, then you can't win any case, because Michael Cohen's going to testify for you and, you know, oh yeah, he's not a reliable person. Juries put people away all the time when the testimony is from someone who is a killer. I mean, consider Sammy the Bull Gravano, who got on the witness stand, admitted killing 19 people, and his jurors still believed his testimony. And some of the best sources I've ever had in my life were crooked cops, prostitutes, drug dealers. I had a gay, homosexual pimp, heroin dealer in San Francisco when I was there with the LA Times, and everything he told me turned out to be absolutely spot on. It was the editors of the LA Times who were unwilling to publish based on what he said, even when he produced dictabelts from a lawyer showing everything he had told me was true. So
you're saying jurors will be put off with it. You know, I have to say personally, you know, sex stuff, I don't give a damn about it. I don't care who's screwing who and whatever. And so,
I agree.
But so sadly, this thing doesn't land with me as a big. Now, tell me why, though, the payoff is a big deal. It relates to elections and election money, doesn't it?
Yes. What happened here is that both Stormy Daniels and Karen McDonald were paid off to keep silent. That could be construed under federal law as a campaign contribution and a campaign expenditure. Trump lied about it in documents. And Michael Cohen was convicted in this conspiracy, says that it should be very easy to convict Donald Trump of the very same set of facts. And I think that Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, who I earlier this month wrote a piece in the New York Daily News laying out a roadmap for him on another way to prosecute Donald Trump. I think Bragg has felt the political pressure that you are a prosecutor. You're supposed to treat everybody equally. You say you're going to. You need to take some kind of action. It makes sense to bring this case. It is not by any means the biggest or most important case that can be brought. It's certainly one that a testimony will prove humiliating for Donald Trump in all likelihood, although I think Donald is humiliation proof.
Well, he'll farm it out to, you know, look, I can't believe he skated on the, grab him by the pee thing. But but he once he wriggled out of that, the guy that's his magic. I'd say that he has two magic powers. The way he wriggles out of stuff with, just force of bullying personality. And I also think he, on a political level, he knows the things people care about. And sadly, I wish more politicians who are righteous in what they value know what people care about. For example, I thought it was interesting that Trump went against the general GOP narrative that's out there on Social Security. Now, I don't know who's still listening to Trump. I mean, he's lost a lot of political power, but that was smart. I mean, his party, that's a loser, man. Getting rid of, if you call that an entitlement program, Social Security, that is a third rail referred to as such for a reason.
Well, yeah, and I would argue, of course, that all the tax benefits Trump got are entitlements too. Entitlements aren't just when the government sends you a check. The right to not pay a tax or a lack of enforcement allowing you to not pay a tax, or a gray area Congress hasn't cleaned up, those are all entitlements as well. Let's not lose sight of that. But Donald got where he got because he is a brilliant con artist. He knows how to read people. He knows that most people will be intimidated by any kind of a threat. During the 2016 campaign, I wrote what, looking back, was a pretty anodyne piece about Donald's mob connections and his deep involvement with this international cocaine trafficker, Joe Wexelbaum. Everything was in the public record, and it was the most heavily lawyered piece of my career. And I've written stories accusing people of murder, of being spies. It was just astonishing. And it was very clear that the lawyers were terrified that Trump would sue them. And of course, my attitude was, well, let him sue you, because you're going to be able to get sanctions against him. At the end of the day, it won't cost you anything, and he doesn't have anything. But Donald is very good at reading the zeitgeist out there. The Republican move, which I tweeted about either early this morning or yesterday, to cut Social Security and Medicare, to cut Medicaid, which means we're going to have disabled and poor children die, to deal with their ideological bias against government debt, is the most foolhardy thing I can imagine. I'm sure that in the districts of congressmen like Chip Roy, it plays well. But to destroy the integrity of the American dollar forever, something Alexander Hamilton fought hard for, that we had to pay our debts, and that Thomas Jefferson, who opposed him initially, went along with that. In fact, that's how we got our first federal subsidy law, a subsidy for cod fishermen in the late 1700s, because the British were harassing our cod fishing fleet out of New England. And 1/4 of America's foreign earnings back then were from cod we sold to Europe. And we have always defended the integrity of the American government's finances through war, peace, recessions, pandemics. And for these Republicans to come along and say, I'm going to ruin the American economy forever because we can't afford this debt. By the way, have you ever noticed that as the government spends money by borrowing it, that the economy gets stronger? Because what the government's doing is it's injecting money into the economy. It means more people have jobs and there's more money to spend.
Well, and not only that, David, I would just remind people, because I think we do lose sight of this, particularly because the messaging is so effective around this, like we're spending too much money and we're demanding these pullbacks in spending, as you've suggested and noted. So now we're talking about raising the debt. You understand these? I understand you understand this, David. But I'm saying we should remind ourselves this is money that's already been spent. All right. This argument is not about what we're going to spend. It's what you guys at the House, you've already spent it. You've already approved it.
Well, this is Congress adopting actually a position of Donald Trump. Donald Trump would often refuse to pay people. He'd owe them $280,000 and he'd pay them $190,000. And they'd say, wait a minute, you owe me more money. And the response to this would be, Donald would say, I've paid you enough. Well, that's not how it works. If your boss next week says, here's a paycheck, I'm only paying you for 3 days because I think you made enough, that's not how it works. And the 14th Amendment says the debts of the government are not to be questioned. Congress spent the money. Doesn't matter if it was a Democratic Congress or a Republican Congress. In this case, the current deficits are from the Republicans in 2017 borrowing money to give the wealthiest people in America, particularly Donald Trump, who was president, and big corporations a tax, quote unquote, cut by borrowing money to allow them to pay less. So we're going to take from you, ordinary people, to continue benefiting people who have more money than they know what to do with, and big companies. And we're now going to ruin the American economy forever. Now, hopefully the business community, the leaders of corporations, responsible grown-up adults who understand money and economics, are going to go to the Republicans and say, you got to allow enough people to cross over, 6 of them, to pass an increase in the debt ceiling. And just one more point, Mark. It's important to understand that the U.S. government can never go broke. It could make us go broke, theoretically, but the government has a monopoly under our Constitution on money. And as long as it can borrow in dollars, if we were borrowing in Swiss francs, we could be in big trouble, but we're borrowing in our dollars. And people are lined up all around the world to borrow from us, to lend us money for us to borrow from them. And because we're what's called a reserve currency, we literally print lots of dollar bills, $5 bills, $20 bills that are then sent overseas and never come back. That's like a net profit to us. If you go to Argentina, where the economy is a wreck, as my wife and I did 9 years ago now, if you had cash, dinner on the credit card is $300. You have $200 in American money and 1s, 5s, and 10s. $200 will be fine. We'll take that instead of the $300. I don't think people appreciate how valuable the dollar is. And once you ruin our position, once you sorry, not meaning to offend people from Wales, once you fail to pay your bills as they come due, you're a deadbeat forever to the rest of the world.
Well, it definitely, it could have
ruined it.
That ripple effect that you talk about is real. It's always been this, I'm going to jump, this aspect of I'm going to jump aspect to,
Right.
Closing government down. It's been used for a long time, generally by the GOP. But this particular configuration of crazies feels just crazy enough to not really understand the ramifications of what you've just touched on.
Well, these are the fruits of gerrymandering, Mark. You create these districts where you could do almost anything and you'll get reelected by people in that district. And it's terrible that the Supreme Court has essentially held recently that it's a political decision how you cut the lines. It has nothing to do with one man, one vote under the 14th Amendment.
That's such a great point that you've just made. And it is how we ended up with this particular collection of crazy. So look, I can't let you go without, I want to mention this one piece, which I really liked, and it's part of a much longer conversation. It's at dcreport.org. And it's by this guy, Terry Schwadron, who I think does really great stuff for you at that. I know you pulled back from DC Report, but that, you helped found it. And this piece is called A Fountain of Distrust. And essentially, Schwadron argues that the American people have lost faith in government. I saw this as a great piece that essentially pulls back the curtain on a number of public institutions. I include media in this, that the public really doesn't have faith in anymore in the ways that the public has in the past. And the ripple effect of that is very serious.
It is. And this has been a long time coming. I mean, as Terry, who I've known for 40 years, was concerned about this in the mid-'80s. And he's hit upon a very important point. There are all sorts of people who, if things aren't perfect, therefore they must be corrupt. I just got a letter yesterday about a book review I wrote in the Washington Post from a guy in prison telling me what a totally corrupt and dishonest person I was because I liked this book. And I never could figure out what it was that set the guy off from his letter. But there are all sorts of people like that. If a member of Congress doesn't do things exactly the way I think, well, therefore they're entirely corrupt. And this has been fostered and encouraged by Fox News, by the Wall Street Journal editorial page, by a lot of politicians. Democracy depends on trust. Wealthy economies depend on trust. You make a deposit on a house, you're trusting that, in fact, the person you left the deposit with is not running away with the money and they actually have the house to sell you. And they're supposed to put it in an escrow account. Yet we're seeing a rise in these crimes where people make a deposit on a rental or a purchase, and it turns out it was just a scam. Trust is fundamental to human progress. And Terry makes a very good point about it. We also have another piece, which is not on the front page at DC Report, but if you go to dcreportsingular.org and type in Dean Baker, it'll pop up right away. Dean Baker is an economist. He's a liberal, and he sticks very clearly to fundamental principles of economics. And it's about how really well our economy is doing and why we should be worried that the Fed will mess it up, because the general history on the Federal Reserve trying to stop inflation is they go too far and they plunge us into an unnecessary recession. But it is a lot of very useful information in Dean's report in plain English. There's a nice little graphic there. Just type in Dean Baker at dcreport.org, and it'll take about 4 minutes to read, and you'll have a very good understanding of the current state of our economy.
I love that. I'll tweet it as well, and I look forward to getting into it. So much more to talk to you about. I'm going to talk about the loss of faith, and we're wrapping up here with David Cay Johnston. But I think the COVID messaging was botched.
Yep.
And I think, and there are a lot of things we could talk about when it comes to COVID. For example, I don't understand why there isn't a blue ribbon panel looking at the handling of COVID. I mean, I don't think it was handled well. And that's not to necessarily, throw, Molotov cocktails rhetorically at, any one either government institution or portion of the medical community, but the messaging wasn't handled well. So anyway, my point in mentioning it, I thought it dovetails with Schwadron's piece, because that hurt faith in yet another institution.
Yep.
Science, the medical community, by extension, government, and the government agencies associated with those things.
Real fundamental problems about maintaining a cohesive society, which is essential if you're going to have a democracy. It's okay to disagree. We can see the world in a different way. But as Senator Moynihan said many years ago, we're all entitled to our own opinion, but not to our own facts.
I just don't know if you can put Humpty Dumpty together again. I guess that's where I am on this.
I mean, that's a very good question. I was in New York City 10 days ago to give 3 talks to investigative reporters and editors. And the front desk clerk at the Hilton where I stayed, I went to complain that they had on one of the far right-wing mendacious TV quote-unquote news organizations in the breakfast room. And she didn't know who they were. And I said, well, these are people who supported the effort to overthrow our government 2 years ago. And she said, to overthrow our government? And I said, yeah, the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol where people died, where President Trump told the mob to go there. And she said, I don't know anything about that. And I was disbelieving. As I talked to her, she finally said, oh, I don't pay any attention to all of the news, never listen to the news. If it comes on, I ignore it. And I thought, I wonder how many people there are like her. Because I actually believe her. I don't think she had any knowledge at all of those events.
That's wild. That you, of all people, could have that exchange with her.
More than a handful of those.
Yeah, I love that you're having that conversation of all people. That's a great, it's just David, love you. Thank you. We'll talk next Tuesday. The great David Cay Johnston, everyone. DCReport.org, and across the spectrum, all of his books and articles. Great to have him here. Mark Thompson.
The Mark Thompson.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.